Hello from the sagebrush and wire of northern Nevada. This is the Ranch Horse Resource Podcast. I'm Rhonda Van Norman, and I host this show along with my husband, Ty Van Norman. Today, we're talking about something that might not cross everybody's mind unless you run the broodmares all together in the stud bunch. It's what to do with the dry mares, those mares that don't have a foal on their side when it's time to turn them out with the stud in a bunch. Now, I know some outfits just run everything together and that works okay for them, but over the years, Ty's found a system that works better for him. I'm anxious to hear a little bit more about this. Ty, let's jump right on in. What can you tell us about how you breed your mares and foals and the dry mares and the studs and the whole bit?
We've gotten to where we don't run any dry mares with the mares and colts, like for a breeding season or in the mare band. I'll try to get the dry mares bred in April or April/the first part of May. We don't usually turn the stud bunches out until 10th or 20th of May. So if there's any dry mares, I try to get them bred earlier and then run them together somewhere else. Just put them off to the side someplace. I found that dry mares can be rather ignorant. They can either act more like a stud than the stud does, or they're just always running an interference, or they get mothered up to the stud so bad that the stud's not fairly aggressive. The mares with colts, that dry mare will just run interference, just always in the way kind of deal. Those mares are more worried about their colts most of the time. So you'll wind up with dry mares, if not something that gets hurt or crippled. I've had dry mares turned out with the stud bunches that hurt baby colts. I'm almost positive that that's what was the cause of it, was the whole dynamics between the stud and the dry mare. It just seems like we get a way better breed back rate. We get minimal injuries with the dry mares. I've done it a couple different ways. If I want to breed these dry mares to different studs, I'll have 2 or 3 studs here at the house, and the dry mares are all in one bunch, and they can come up fairly close to one of the stud pins, and then we can kind of see who's in, and then grab those mares and stick them with whatever stud we want to breed them to. In the past, I have taken and just made a whole broodmare band out of just dry mares and put them with one single stud for the summer. So there's a couple different ways a guy can do that. That way there's no colts in there to get hurt. And even at that, even with a whole bunch of dry mares, there's usually 1 or 2 that don't get bred for that same reason, because those dry mares can be ignorant. And if the stud's not fairly aggressive, it's kind of a challenge to get some of the dry mares bred.
Ty, do you mind sharing a little bit more information about how you came to that conclusion that taking the dry mares out and breeding them separately was a better decision for the Van Norman horse program?
Having colts get hurt year after year and watching those horses outside, like a lot of the stud bunches are in with cattle that we have to move periodically through the summer, and you'd get to see how the dry mares were always clinging to the stud. So a lot of times when the horses are out grazing in a band like that, the stud will stay off to one side. And you can just, I've observed it many times, either sitting there on a ridge waiting for cattle to come together, or something where you can tell that there's a mare and colt that mare's in and wanting to get bred. And every time the stud goes over there, a dry mare will trot over there and either run the mare off or get in the stud's face or just run interference, or to the point of just going, I've seen them go over there and just whip the stud plumb away from that other mare and drive him back out where he was. And then they kind of just stay in between the herd and him. And so if there's a big melee there where the stud's trying to get to that mare to breed it, he's pushing, he's trying to enforce his, and she's fighting back. And the colt get caught in the big whirling deal, get knocked down or run over. And eventually that mare with the colt's going to be more worried about her colt than she is about getting bred back. So I guess it comes from just watching over the years, just seeing what was going on.
So the mare, you think, becomes more dominant when she doesn't have a colt distracting her? And
They can. They can. Or sometimes they just get so mothered up to the stud. They might not have to be dominant, but they just go over there. They're just right next to the stud the whole time. So the stud's trying to breed the mare and colt. That other mare that's got the colt on her isn't real comfortable about that mare being right with the stud. So when the stud jumps that mare, she basically kind of spooks away from the other mare, because even if that mare's not aggressive, she's right there. One year there was a guy that wanted to breed a couple mares to one of our studs, so I turned them out with the stud and his mares and colts, and later on went over there, and multiple different times while we were over there doing stuff with cattle, I could see that those two mares were just constantly running interference. Like every time he would go towards the mares and colts, they would come from somewhere. It didn't matter whether they were eating. They worked like a team. They would just run over there and get on both sides of him or get in front of him or something. They just stayed right in his face. So if he was trying to go breed one of my mares with the colt on him, they would the presence of them would either run those mares and colts off away from him, or they would actually literally fight with him. I mean, he was going to have to really kick some ass, and then there was two of them that were doing it to him. So needless to say, I don't know that getting 2 outside mares bred and 4 of my mares coming up dry that year was really a good payoff.
Do you think it had something to do with the fact that those 2 particular mares hadn't been part of the main herd?
Maybe, but I think for the most part it was they were dry. If they had colts, they'd be more worried about their colts. They wouldn't be running interference. They might be not like really part of the stud bunch. None of my studs will run a mare off. So far, all my studs will take a mare, an outside mare. But they would have been more worried about their colts. They wouldn't have been doing that stuff with their colts. I've never seen one with a mare and colt doing that with the stud, running interference like that. So I have seen like outside mares and colts that we bring in there, and that's before when I've had people want to breed to our studs. I'll ask them what they have, whether they have dry mares or mares and colts. I've taken mares and colts, and they'll stay like on the edge of my band because they don't really fit in, but nothing really runs them off other than just a little bit of a pecking order. They still stay with this stud bunch, and I've never had any of those type of horses try to whip the stud off another mare or whip a mare away from another from the stud, get too possessive of the stud. That actually happened a couple different times before I kind of decided we needed to do something different. So the one I just said was 2 mares that came from the same place. Then it happened another time. I think it was a different stud with the mares that they were just 2 outside mares from different places. Same deal. And at that time, instead of, not only did I have a couple dry mares, but I had one colt that got hurt. Did never come out of it. And I'm pretty sure it was because of that. Something that happened during that deal from one of them dry mares, because I'd been out there a couple times and the colt was completely fine, older colt. And then the next thing you know, I don't know, I can't remember now if it had a hip knocked down or something, but it wasn't right when we got it back. And those mares were always like, when I'd show up with the pickup, the studs usually, and some of our mares will come to grain. So they'd start to come over there, and those dry mares would come flying in there and crash into the herd and pin their ears and either try to run the mares and colts all away from the stud or try to drive the stud away from us, from the grain or from whatever the stud was going to do. So I've seen it happen way more times with a dry mare than ever with a mare and colt.
So what's your recommendation if you've got dry mares?
I would try to get them bred early. If you can't I don't know. There's been times where I've pulled a stud out of a stud bunch to come breed a dry mare. That works pretty good too.
Well, to keep this episode short and sweet, I'm going to wrap it up right here. Ty, that was really interesting. I appreciate what you had to share with us. So my main takeaway is that you just need to find out what works for you and your program. But if something isn't working, it might be time to take another look at it and see if there's a different way to do it. Sometimes the difference between things running smooth and things turning into a full-on wreck is just understanding the nature of the horse a little bit deeper. I think that's where good horsemanship starts anyways, is understanding the horse just a little bit deeper. Well, we sure appreciate you spending part of your day with us here at Ranch Horse Resource. If this episode made you think about your own horses or your own program, or maybe you just found it interesting, would you mind sharing it with a friend? And if you'd like to know more about Ranch Horse Resource, you can hop on over to our website at ranchhorseresource.com. And if you haven't done so already, you might consider subscribing. That way you can get the notifications right when the show is released. And follow along for more horsemanship and roping tips right here. Well, until next time, you guys have a great week.